The night I told my mother I was going to marry a man she'd already decided was beneath us. She didn't look at me. She looked at the 7-year-old sitting beside him at her dining room table and said without lowering her voice at all, "We are not in the business of taking in strays, Stella." Nell didn't flinch. She was 7, so she didn't know the full weight of the word. But she knew the weight of the room, and I watched her set down her fork very carefully, the way a kid does when she's trying not to draw attention to herself. Declan didn't move. He just looked at my mother for a long moment, and then he looked at Nell, and whatever he was feeling, he kept it behind his teeth. My mother gave me her terms before the night was over. Her or them. She said it like it was simple arithmetic, and she added the one thing she would use to hold me in place for the next 7 years. Do this to us now, and your father will never recover from it. I stayed, at the table, and eventually out the door. That was 2018. And what came after? The years of silence, the lie that grew until it had its own shadow, the morning a typed list of demands arrived in my living room, and my husband said one word that turned everything inside out. None of it was simple arithmetic. My name is Stella. I'm 32 years old, and I've been a paralegal at a regional real estate law firm for the past 9 years. What that means, practically, is that I spend my days inside other people's paper trails. Contracts, surveys, title chains, recorded liens. I match what people claim they own against what they actually signed their name to. Sue. I have never once been surprised that people misremember agreements to their own benefit. I have been surprised once by how much of my own life I misremembered the same way. I grew up in Cartersburg, a suburb of Columbus, in a house that looked easy from the outside. Nice street, good school district. My dad coached Little League one summer when I was 9. On paper, we were stable. In practice, everything in that house ran on a ledger that only my mother kept. My mother's name is Lorena. She is a woman who has spent 63 years being primarily concerned with how things read to other people. Not whether they're true, not whether they're kind, whether they land correctly. She managed the family's social life the way a publicist manages a brand. Always one step ahead of the story that hadn't been told yet. Always ready to correct the version that made us look ordinary. My brother Bryce was 2 years older and functionally her co-author. He was the one she photographed, the one whose achievements she announced at church. His college graduation photo sat on the mantel in a frame that had its own small light aimed at it. I am not exaggerating. There was a picture light. I was in exactly one photo in that house, and it was a group shot where I was partially behind a plant. My dad, I want to be honest about him even now, was a genuinely warm man who had made a permanent peace with not being in charge of anything under his own roof. He had a habit, when my mother was building towards something he didn't agree with, of picking up the TV remote and studying it, like there was a setting he hadn't found yet. I learned to read that remote. It meant the conversation was over, and she'd won. I became the child who documented things, not out of spite, out of survival, in a house where the story got revised. Every time it became inconvenient, I learned early to hold on to what had actually happened. I kept notes. I kept cards. I kept the little slips of paper that proved who had said what. That habit later would turn out to be the one thing nobody in my family thought to account for. I met Declan on a Tuesday in March, standing at the counter of my firm with a set of blueprints under one arm and a look on his face that said he had been dealing with bureaucratic nonsense longer than he was willing to do quietly. He was there about a permitting dispute. His company had been flagged on a code compliance issue he could prove was the inspector's error, and he needed someone to help him build the paper case. He was patient in the way people get patient when they've spent years in physical work that punishes impatience. He set his blueprints on the counter and walked me through exactly what had happened, step by step, with the kind of precision that told me he'd been over it many times in his head before he got to me. Behind him in the waiting area, a small girl sat cross-legged in a chair, drawing something in a wide-ruled spiral notebook with complete and total focus. Her name was Nell. She was 6. She was his. Her mother had left when Nell was 3. Declan said it the way you state a fact about weather. It happened, it shaped things, you built your life around it. He had decided, he told me later, that Nell would never once feel like the reason for any of it. While I pulled up the permit records, Nell held up her notebook to show me. Unprompted. She had drawn a detailed floor plan of what appeared to be a house, with every room labeled in careful pencil. One room at the far corner said, "The people who don't stay." I told her it was a very impressive drawing. She looked at me, the way a small person looks at an adult, who has said something technically accurate, but not quite right, and turned back to her notebook. I fell for Declan in stages the way you fall for something that isn't trying to impress you. Nell was a different project altogether. She had a system for testing adults, and she ran it without apology. When I started coming around, she would position herself near a window that faced the driveway and check whether my car was still there 15 minutes after I arrived. Then again, an hour later. She didn't ask me to prove myself. She just waited to see what I'd do. So I stopped trying to perform warmth and I just kept showing up, regularly, for months, until the day I noticed she had stopped checking the window. That was the day I understood the assignment. I told my family about Declan in June. I had waited as long as I could because I already knew. The dinner at my mother's house, the 7-year-old and the fork, and the voice that didn't bother to lower itself, that was the last dinner I ever sat through at her table. My mother's choice was delivered quietly in the kitchen, while Declan loaded the dishwasher, and Nell drew in her notebook on the couch. Him and his situation, or us. And then she said what she would say every time she needed to stop me from thinking clearly. "Your father isn't well, Stella. He needs the family around him right now." You really want to do this to him? I didn't know yet that a sentence could be a hook in your throat for 7 years. Declan and I were married the following October in the backyard of our neighbor Inez Caldwell, who had decided, without consulting anyone, that she was adopting all 3 of us. Inez was 68, recently retired from 30 years of teaching 4th grade, and she had the specific authority of a woman who is no longer afraid of anyone. She lent us her grandmother's tablecloth, called it her one good thing, and cried through the entire ceremony in the way people cry when they're actually happy and not just performing it. There were maybe 15 people there. Declan's friend Rourke came early, helped us assemble folding chairs, stayed until the end. Nell was the flower girl and approached the task with the gravity of a small civil servant performing an official duty. Before the ceremony, Declan found me in Inez's guest room and said the thing I've carried with me every day since. "If they ever come to the door," he said, "we open it. I don't want to be the reason you lost them." He meant it completely, and he proved it for 7 years, even when I stopped believing the door was worth keeping unlocked. I mailed my parents a wedding announcement. The envelope came back 3 weeks later, unopened. My name crossed out in my mother's handwriting. I held it in the driveway for a long time. Then I did what I always do. I put it in the binder. The binder started as a habit. I had 2 of them for work, one for each active case file, and somewhere in the first year of our marriage I started a 3rd one. I told myself it was just organization. I think I knew it was something else. The calls from extended family started within months, always carrying the same message, wrapped in different voices. My aunt called to say she was praying for my dad, and hoped I could live with my choices. A cousin texted to ask if I knew what I was putting him through. My mother's version of events had gotten there first, and the version was this. I had chosen a man and walked away from a father who needed me. The phrase she used, over and over in every version that reached me, was, "your father's condition." It was never specific, it was never a diagnosis with a name or a doctor's office attached, just the condition, a thing that existed in the corner of every conversation, an implication I was too far away to verify. I believed it. That part still sits in my chest like a stone. I was cut off, I had no access, and I was 27 years old, carrying a guilt that had been specifically designed to be unverifiable. A mother doesn't invent a sick husband. The thought was too ugly to complete. So I didn't. If you're new here, take a second to subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. Nell was 8 when she asked me the thing I had been dreading. She came to the kitchen table with one of her floor plan drawings in her hand and said, very quietly, "Did they not come to the wedding because of me?" I didn't give her a speech. Speeches are for the person giving them, I said. They left because of who they are. You are the reason I stayed. And then I did the thing that mattered more than any word. The next morning, I drove to her school and walked into the front office and added myself to every form that had a blank next to emergency contact. That afternoon, Nell drew a new floor plan. Bigger this time, our whole block, every house, every driveway. The ones she decided to trust were labeled in blue, the uncertain ones in orange. The ones she decided not to trust got a small X near the door. She folded it and handed it to me. "So we know where to go," she said. I put it on the refrigerator. I didn't know yet what it would mean later. The lean years were the kind that don't photograph well. Declan's company did structural inspections and code compliance consulting, the unglamorous work of making sure buildings didn't kill the people inside them. He had started it out of frustration with developers who cut corners, and he built it the way he built everything. Slowly, with his hands in it, not trusting any number he hadn't personally stood underneath. We had 2 incomes, a mortgage that made us both wince every January, and a kid who needed school trips and new cleats, and about 40 other things we made work, because there was no alternative. I kept the paperwork, he kept the knowledge. Neither of us could have done it alone. There was a night in our second winter that told me everything about who we were going to be. Nell spiked a fever at 11 p.m. that climbed to 104. Declan was 3 hours out on a job he couldn't leave without losing a contract keeping us solvent through February, and I had a filing due at 7 a.m. for a case that would determine whether I kept the account. I turned my work phone face down. I sat on the floor next to her bed with a cool cloth and a bowl of water until the fever broke near 4 in the morning. When she woke up, the first thing she said was, "You stayed the whole night." "Of course," I said. She nodded like she was recording it. She had been running the same test on me since the day we met. That night, the results came in. Declan's company grew the way things grow when the underlying idea is actually correct and the person building it refuses to let vanity outrun the work. By 2022, he had 12 employees. By 2023, a contract with a regional developer requiring ongoing compliance monitoring. By 2024, a second contract with a commercial real estate group that had just had a very expensive lesson in what happens when you skip the structural review. That year, Bryce texted me. After 4 years of nothing, not a birthday, not a Christmas, not a single word, he wrote, "I've missed you, Stella. I think about you all the time." For about 40 minutes, I sat with my phone in my hands, wanting very badly for it to be real. Then his next message arrived. "Hey, random question, but I've been trying to get a sign-off on a project I'm developing, and I heard Declan's company does compliance work. Any chance he'd do me a favor and take a look? Just family." There it was. I saved the text in a separate folder on my phone, labeled it with the date, and added a copy to the binder. 6 weeks later, he texted again, warmer this time, a childhood memory, a joke we used to have, and then, 4 messages in, "I'm in a tough spot with this development, Stell. I just need someone in my corner right now." I laid the new messages next to the old ones. Same opening, same pivot. My brother had a script, and he'd been running it on me for years, and I had been too lonely to see it. The crack in the lie came from an accident. My cousin texted me a photo from Thanksgiving meaning to send it to someone else. She realized her mistake and apologized immediately, but I had already seen it. It was my father sitting at a table full of people, laughing at something off, his hand raised mid-story like he was acting something out. His color was good. His eyes were clear and present. He looked like my dad. My father, who had a condition, who couldn't handle stress. I sat with that photo for a long time. I felt the guilt I had been carrying shift the way a heavy thing shifts when you realize you've been holding it at the wrong angle. Underneath was something colder and quieter. If he was fine, the lie had never been about protecting him. It had been about controlling me. And a lie that patient, maintained for 7 years, is not built for nothing. It is built for a payoff. The same month, Declan came home and told me a mid-sized commercial real estate company had made an acquisition offer for his firm. The number on paper was $9 million, locked in an earn-out structure that meant we wouldn't see most of it for 2 years. What we actually had in the bank that week couldn't have covered a transmission replacement. $9 million on paper. I was doing the math on our grocery budget. The family would only ever see the headline. My mother called on a Friday morning, 8 days after the acquisition was reported in the Columbus Business First. 8 days. I noted it the way I note everything. Her voice was warm and smooth, as if the years had simply drifted closed on their own. Stella, sweetheart, it's been too long. Not I'm sorry, not I was wrong. Just too long, as if time were the thing that had crossed out my name and not her hand. She wanted to come by that weekend. She said she thought it was time to heal things. She said family was family. Bryce texted within the hour. Same warmth, same childhood memories I hadn't thought about in years and woven through. Don't you think it's time we figured out what's fair for everyone? What's fair for everyone? Declan and I talked it through at the kitchen table that night. We decided to open the door one time, and to listen and not to argue. People show you everything when they think they've already won. We agreed on our limits, agreed on what we wouldn't give, and we agreed without any discussion that Nell would not be in the room. She was 14, and this was not a wound we were reopening in front of her. She went to Inez's for the evening. Before they arrived, I took the binder off the shelf and set it on the counter. Closed. Within reach. My mother and Bryce arrived together on a Saturday afternoon. My mother in her good blazer. Bryce with his shoulders back and his eyes moving around our house, the way a person's eyes move when they're assessing. My mother was carrying a folder. I noticed the folder before I noticed anything else, because I notice things. The corners were soft with handling, the edges worn. Whatever was inside had been worked on for a while. This was not the spontaneous gesture of a woman who had missed her daughter. This had been ready. We sat in the living room. Declan offered coffee. My mother looked around our house and did the arithmetic I knew she was doing. Then she folded her hands on top of the folder and spoke in her gentlest voice. We think it's time to heal this family. But healing means being honest about what everyone has contributed and what everyone needs. She opened the folder. The list was typed, 4 items. The first was a lump sum of $400,000 for years of family expenses, including costs related to your father's ongoing care. The second was a request that Declan's firm perform a full compliance review on Bryce's stalled development project, at no charge as a family contribution. The third was an interest-free loan to Bryce for $180,000 to cover a construction gap. The fourth was a statement, written out, ready for my signature, that I had returned to my family and wished to move forward together. Declan picked up the folder. He read it the way he reads everything, without rushing, going back over the parts that mattered. His face was calm, and then his eyes stopped moving, and he read one line a second time, and a third, and the corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile, exactly. The specific look of a man who has just been handed something he didn't expect. He set the folder down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "The first item," he said, looking at my mother. "Your father's ongoing care, 80,000 here." He found what he was looking for and turned the screen to face the room. It was a video, Bryce's own Instagram account from 3 weeks ago before he'd thought to take it down. A backyard cookout at Bryce's house. I recognized the deck chairs, and in the center of the frame my father was standing perfectly upright, perfectly present, telling a long and animated story to a circle of people, his hands moving, everyone laughing. Sharp, clear, himself. "That's your father," Declan said, "at your brother's house. 3 weeks ago. You've been charging us for care he doesn't need." My mother's face changed. For a moment she stopped breathing. Bryce started to speak, something about context, about the cost of planning ahead, but Declan raised one hand not unkindly and said, "I'm not done." He looked at me. "Harriet," he said. One word, our lawyer's name, that was it. And then he took out his phone and sent her a photograph of the typed list. I opened the binder. I want to tell you, I had planned every word. I hadn't. I had planned the order. In a family where the story was always being rewritten, order was the only thing that couldn't be argued with. First, the returned envelope. My name crossed out in my mother's handwriting. Nell's name on the return address label because she had been the one to write it. "She was 8 when she mailed this," I said. "She used her own birthday money for the stamp." Then, Bryce's texts. Both sets, the 2021 version and the 2024 version. I read them aloud, side by side. Same opening, same childhood memory, same pivot toward money. "You've been running this on me for years," I said to my brother. "I kept both, because I keep everything." Then, a printed email from a cousin from 2019, where she had mentioned my father being at the hardware store. During the same period, my mother was telling the family he couldn't manage outings. I had the date. I had the timestamp from when I'd printed it. "You froze him at his worst moment," I said to my mother, "and collected interest on it for 7 years. There was a real health scare. I know there was. And then he recovered, and you kept him sick in the story, because a recovered husband is just your husband. A sick husband is leverage." My mother started to speak. She reached for the version of events she had lived inside so long she may have half believed it herself. "We only ever wanted what was." "Where were you?" I said. "The night I sat on the floor next to Nell for 6 hours, with a fever and a wet cloth, where were you?" When she asked me if they stayed away because of her, she was 8 years old and she asked me that, "Where were you?" I took the floor plan out of the binder, Nell's blueprint, the one from when she was 8, the one I'd had laminated. Every room labeled. The blue houses, the orange ones, the ones with a small X near the door. I laid it across the typed list right over the line about the compliance review on Bryce's project. "She mapped what was worth keeping safe when she was 8 years old," I said. "You are not on the map." The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with drama. And then, from upstairs came the sound of a door opening. Nell had come home early. Inez had driven her back, and she had come in through the back door, and she had been standing in the hallway long enough to understand the shape of what was happening. She walked into the living room, 14 years old, her father's patience in her face, and her own particular precision in her spine. She looked at my mother. She looked at Bryce, not the way a child looks at adults who have authority, the way she had always looked at uncertain houses. "You came here for money," she said. She said it matter-of-factly the way she said most things. "You've never once asked me my name." Then she turned and walked back upstairs. The door closed quietly behind her. That silence was the end of it. There was nothing my mother could build on top of it. There was no version of that moment that didn't mean exactly what it meant. My mother tried once more. She straightened. She reached for dignity. She said something about family always finding a way. Bryce looked at the floor. Declan stood up first. He wasn't dramatic about it. He just stood and said, "I think we're done here." I did not see them out. I stayed in my seat and watched them leave and heard the front door close, and I sat in the quiet for a minute before I let myself exhale. Our lawyer, Harriet, sent a letter the following week. It was precise and documented, and it cited the typed list by date and content. The response came back within 10 days agreeing to every term, the shortest, most honest communication I had ever received from my family. No demands, no story, just signatures. My dad called me 3 weeks after that, not my mother. My dad on his own phone, on a Tuesday night. He asked if we could meet somewhere neutral. I said yes. We met at a diner halfway between his house and mine. He looked like himself. He looked good. He did not pick up the table's paper napkin dispenser and study it. His hand stayed flat on the table the entire time, and I noticed, because I noticed things, and because I had never seen him do that before. "I let her make you the villain because it was easier than standing next to you," he said. I knew the story wasn't right, and I kept my hands busy and said nothing. "That's mine. Not hers. Mine." He didn't ask for a fast resolution. He didn't bring up money. He asked if there was any version of things where he could exist, somewhere at the edge of my life, and earn the distance back, slowly, over time, on my terms. "I can forgive you," I told him. "That part's already done. Trust is the expensive one. You'll pay it in small amounts, over time, and I get to set the price." He nodded like a man who had expected exactly that and considered it fair. We started with coffee once a month, small. Either of us could cancel without explanation. A door propped just barely open, for him alone. My mother and Bryce did not get a door. That was my decision, made out loud on my own terms, and I have not second-guessed it once. The night after everything, the three of us made dinner in our too small kitchen. Declan burned the garlic. Nell sat on the counter and provided a running commentary of his failures in the tone of a disappointed cooking show judge. Inez came over and ate the leftovers she pretended not to want. Nobody owed anyone anything. Nobody was keeping score. Later, after Inez went home and Declan was doing dishes, Nell came and stood next to me at the kitchen table. She had her old floor plan in her hands. I'd left it out from the confrontation and hadn't put it away yet. She studied it for a minute. Then she picked up a pencil from the counter and, without saying anything, drew a small new room in the corner, where her 8-year-old self had written, "The people who don't stay." She erased that label. She wrote 2 letters in the new room, D and S. Dad and Stella. She handed it back to me. "For the frame," she said, like it was obvious, like she had always known we'd end up there. I hung it by the front door. It's there now, next to Declan's work jacket and Nell's backpack, and all the quiet evidence of a life built by people who showed up when they could have left. People ask me sometimes if the money changed things. It didn't. The money was locked on paper for most of this story, and it never once fixed anything that mattered. What fixed it was smaller and harder to photograph. It was a man who kept a door unlocked for 7 years without forcing me through it. It was a neighbor who cried at a backyard wedding because someone else was happy. It was a 14-year-old who walked into a room full of adults who had never learned her name and said the truest thing anyone said that day. Family is not the people who raised you and kept the receipt. It is not bloodline, and it is not net worth. Family is who is still in the room when you have nothing to offer, and who wants nothing from the room when you finally do. If any part of this reached you, if you are the person right now being told that the people beside you are a burden, that your worth is what you can be billed for. I want you to hear the one thing it took me 7 years to learn. You are allowed to close the door, you are allowed to keep it locked for some people and propped open for others. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing, and you hold the key to both. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. I'll see you there.